Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, I'm actually going to be sharing a time lapse of two paintings. The top one, which is from August 2020, and the bottom, which is from April of 2021, which I just painted at the time of this video. And the reason why I'm sharing both is because they were both painted from the exact same reference photo and just 9 months apart. And I was actually recording this video for the members of my painting community, for my watercolor community called Paint With Me, and just sharing with them my takeaways and process and how it's changed between the two paintings. Mostly because this first painting was actually a lesson painting, an exercise that I guided them through back in August of 2020. And since then, my own experience level has changed and the way I approach paintings has changed as well. And so it was a really interesting thing for me to revisit, especially, with what I've learned so far. And something that was interesting about the process of reviewing my own work is realizing that there's that saying, or some people say this, that it's almost better to be only 2 steps ahead of someone than 1,000. I don't think that's the exact quote, but the idea that I'm close to, the people who I'm guiding, I'm close to their level and not too far ahead. And looking back at this as I continue to grow my own experience, and perhaps as I am guiding people who are just starting with watercolors, something that is really interesting about these older lessons that I have shared and that I've saved in our library is that these actually might be more helpful to someone who's just starting, because the techniques and the way I am approaching these lessons that I've done in the past are closer to where they are at and meeting them where they're at in their experience. At least that's what I'd like to think. And I think that, this is coming from me trying to take classes as well from people who are much further ahead than I am. And sometimes I get lost and I get confused and I am not quite there, and the jump is too far for me to make at the moment. So just looking back at the way I approached this painting from 9 months ago, I realized that, I've learned things since then, but they might be too advanced. Not that I'm advanced. I don't think I'm advanced. I still very much look at myself as a beginner, but I'm picking up a lot of things as I learn. And they just might be beyond the level of somebody who's, just starting. And so I had told my members, if you haven't tried this before and you feel that you're just starting in your journey, this version, this August 2020 version, is better to follow along with in many ways than to try and keep up with my April version, which you'll see later on in this video. And in fact, the April version wasn't even filmed as a guided lesson. So I also realized, looking back on this, that painting with the intent of guiding somebody through is different than painting for myself and then trying to tell somebody what I did. Because often when I paint for myself, it's very intuitive and I'm sort of going out of order. I'll make mistakes and try to fix them. But that is confusing to somebody who's trying to follow along, especially in a video. And so I just wanted to share that. And I know there are people here who have asked me to share my process more in voiceovers. And then I have people telling me that they don't want me to talk about things as I'm painting. And so I think at the end of the day, I can't make everybody happy, but hopefully this chattiness isn't bothering you. And I wanted to let you know that this painting, definitely there was a process to it. It's really hard to share everything that I did step by step, especially in a time lapse. But I am going to sort of tell you the approach of how I did my current version and the similarities and differences there are to the version that you just watched. And you can go back and watch both of them and sort of make a decision for yourself what approach you might want to take if you want to try this yourself. So the reference photo is linked below. So I'm going to just start telling you how I did this one and how it differs. So this version is different from my version 9 months ago, namely in a few ways. The first is that this is larger. So this is an 8 by 10 and the previous version was a 6 by 9. And approaching a larger painting, especially working with a lot of water, is going to be trickier than working on a smaller painting. The second thing is you'll notice that I approached this painting without taping it down. Instead, my paper is wet on both sides and then it's suctioned itself to an acrylic panel. So the entire paper is soaked and I am approaching this painting as a full wash versus the other version. It's split. So I did the sky first and then I did the water second. And this ties also back to, the amount of surface area you're working with. So working on a large painting is going to be more difficult than working on a smaller painting when you're doing wet on wet because you're working with water and the rate at which water dries with watercolors. Now, if you're taking a small painting and then you're splitting it up into sections, that makes it even a little bit easier because you're only having to concentrate on a smaller surface area first and then looking at another surface, a smaller surface area later. So this version that I'm doing now was trickier even for me because I'm working with the whole sheet at once and it's a larger sheet. But as you can see, I did the wash all at once and, approaching the sky or the water, either way, you would do the same thing. So it's a wash and it has gradients in it and color mixes. And this is where you sort of let the watercolor bloom and bleed and mix, and you're going to get these really soft effects. So whether it's the background or underlayer of the water or it's the sky, they're approached the same way. I just happen to be doing this all at once as one big wash. And if you look at the reference photo, the underlying colors of the horizon line and the water are very similar, so it's okay to approach as a full wash. The only difference is do you want to be managing all of this surface area at once? So other techniques that I use that are similar to in both are lifting. So I lifted clouds out with a towel on both versions, and I also did a little bit of lifting with my paintbrush. I also added in the dark purple clouds the same way. So they're added when the first wash is still wet in order to get these fuzzy edges. And that's basically how I did it in both versions. It's just that this version I felt was more successful because I had bigger strokes, I did more shadowing, and I think I was just overall a little bit more confident about it. I also added subtle details that I think helped, which were these very light tints of purple to the other clouds, the lighter clouds. And I did a little bit more concentrated and focused effort on matching the cloud formations in the reference photo. The first one was a little bit more abstract, I would say. The clouds weren't quite the same. And going back to what I meant earlier about, when I'm filming a lesson and guiding people through it, there's a step-by-step. And there's often I don't have these little mistakes. Like I don't know if you noticed it, but there was a drop of water that landed on my wash and it started to cauliflower because the timing of adding water at this point to a wash that's not completely dry is going to create cauliflowers and backgrounds. And so I had to fix it. And that is not something that, is planned for in a guided lesson. But in my own painting, I just, tried to fix it. I happened to manage to, actually, luckily, because I didn't want to start this painting over. I kind of liked where it was going. I managed to fix it. And I don't actually know exactly how, besides the fact that I used a fluffy dry brush and I was able to blend out the edges and soften them and make it look as if I didn't have any cauliflowers, which is great, right? But that's not part of a planned lesson. So that's just something that happened in this painting. And the second thing what I'm doing differently in this one versus the other one, like I said before, is the sky was not done separately than the water, but in a very similar vein, I sort of did the first wash, finished up the sky, dried everything, and then came back, and now I'm doing a second layer of a wet on wet wash over the initial dry layer. So the water is in its own way being done separately, if that makes sense. And what's nice about this technique that I didn't start using until more recently was, this idea that you can do a first wash and put down your colors that are part of your base layer, and then let the whole thing dry, and then know that you can come back and do another wash over your first wash. So and treat it almost the same way. So I'm, essentially doing another wet on wet wash over a dry layer. And then one thing I did here that was a mistake, and it's not really a mistake, it's just I did it out of order, was I was trying to lift out reflections, as you saw with the flat brush, before I was done with the water. I really should have, it was just out of order. Like you'll see later, I actually should have been lifting the reflections out of a final layer of purple over the water. So what I did was, when I realized I wasn't supposed to be lifting yet, I just dried everything, and then I went back and I did the hills in the distance, and then I move on to sort of fixing up a couple of sections. So I wanted to fix up a little bit of the clouds near the horizon, because I had left a couple of lighter spots that weren't supposed to be there when I was looking back at the reference photo. So little things like that. And then I went back and I did the tree. The tree branches in this version, I actually don't think are quite as successful as the first version. I took creative liberty on both versions from the reference photo by adding a trunk to the tree. I just felt like it needed some solidity instead of just branches or twigs coming into the frame. But in this version, I painted these branches that have no leaves on it all too similarly. They're all sort of pointing in the same direction. I don't know what I was thinking. They're just all pointing in the same direction. And then, it wasn't going well. I think I added a few branches that started going in more organic directions based on going back and observing the reference photo. And, it sort of works. I think adding a trunk helps distract from the fact that I didn't quite get these branches right. But overall, this is another thing I've learned in the past 9 months, is how to let go a little bit more. I think that is something that watercolors has taught me to do. Art has taught me to do, is to learn how to let go of a lot of perfectionism, a lot of my perfectionist tendencies. So this is just more of that practice in play. So now you can see that now that that water is dry, I'm doing a third wash, a third layer over the water so that I can lift out the reflections. So I put on a diluted purple wash, and then now I know I can lift out of it, because underneath I have a lighter color that I built up. And that's really when I should have been lifting. So if somebody was trying to follow this, you might think, oh, I have to lift, but actually that was a mistake. So this is where the lifting actually should happen. And this is, to be completely transparent, this is part of my journey that I'm still working on, like figuring out the best way to lift. I don't think I have the best brush. I don't think I've found it. If anybody has a brush that they love lifting with, please leave it in the comments below. I'm looking for one. So you can see I'm just trying to make it work with what I have. And I even used a paper towel to blot it up. This is true painting for myself. It's just me figuring things out. And I think that's the reality of learning, right? It's just, we're just trying to make it work. And just learning along the way. So that's one of the things. It's just, I don't have a great brush that just lifts like magic, or maybe it's a timing thing. I'm pretty open about the fact that I am no expert. I'm still learning. And so this is one of those things. And I think overall, though, one thing that is really successful, that I felt was successful in this version of this painting versus the last one, was the ability to, I mentioned this before, the ability to let things go. I think letting go of washes, making sure not to touch the painting too much, really has allowed this version to feel softer and less overworked and more luminous in its own way. Of course, there's always room for improvement, but at this point, I'm proud of it, right? And I think that that's something we all have to recognize in our own work, is that whatever we're painting in that moment is the best that we can do at that time. And we should be proud of where we're at, because we know that the more we paint, the better we're going to get. And so I hope that this video was helpful for you to see the own progress maybe that I've made over the last 9 months, and listening to a little bit of my process. Hopefully that has helped you too. And if you give this a try, I hope you have fun with it.